Father, we bless you. Teach us your word in the name of Jesus. This is the ministry of Moses, part 46. And we're going to take our text from Exodus 33, from verse 12 to 14. Now, Moses returned to the tabernacle and continued his discussion with God. Let us consider verse 12 to 14. And Moses said unto the Lord, See, thou sayest unto me, Bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight. Now therefore, I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. And he said, My presence shall go with thee, and I will give you rest. Moses reminded God of his words and promises to him, so he started making his request in verse 13. The prayer actually started in verse 12, but Moses started making a request in verse 13. Sometimes the best way to pray is not to start with the request. You will need to show God his word, repeat, you know, the things he has said to you in the past before going into your request. This was the prayer format that Moses used here. As great as Moses was before God, he is a man that knows how to reference God. As great as he was, he understood the place of reference. He was not becoming too familiar with God. He knew God is God, and he knew his place as a man. So you may never stay in your place as a man until you begin to see God as God. You may never stay in your place as a man until you begin to see God as God. And of course, if you don't know how to stay in your place as a man before God, you are likely to be a victim of God's anger. Hallelujah. Shabalante kosikete barante. Isoze barande brosu kambrada balabalaba. Rebebendo suke branda labalabante teketea. If you study the nature of Moses' prayer, you will discover that he did not use words like, You must do this, Lord. He understands that God is supreme. So whenever he comes to God, his words are usually directed towards the will of God. You will hear him say, Lord, if I find grace in your sight, and so on. The first thing Moses requested for was grace. He knew that he cannot get what he wanted without finding grace. After this, then he said, Show me thy way. This is because until you find grace, you cannot know the way of the Lord. It will take grace to find the way of the Lord. Nobody can find grace, nobody can find God's way without first finding God's grace. After this, he said, That I may know thee. Kai. Moses is a man of great understanding. He knows the sequence of prayer. God helping me, I will show you the linear graph of Moses' prayer later. Moses' prayer was in a chronological order. Praise God. Shabendo Sikabalabalaba. Now, if you find God's grace, you will find God's way. And if you find God's way, then you will know God. And finally, Moses rounded off his prayer by asking for grace again. Let us look at Moses' prayer graph. Now, it started with God's grace, from God's grace to God's way, from God's way to God's knowledge, and from God's knowledge to God's grace. From God's grace to God's way, from God's way to God's knowledge, and from God's knowledge to God's grace. Moses started his prayer by asking for grace and ended it by asking for grace. This means that you will need more grace to keep, maintain, and sustain whatever you have gotten by grace. You will need more grace to keep whatever you have gotten by grace. If by grace you found God's way and by grace you are walking in it, then you will need more grace to be consistent. The second way of Moses was now, uh, the second request of Moses was, show me your way. Moses desired to know God's way because he knows that it is only by walking in that way that he will know God. You know, when you hear people like Father Moses in the Bible saying, show me your way, you may begin to ask yourself, what exactly is this man saying? Is it not the same Moses whose hand, the Lord performed mighty miracle? Is it not the same man through whose hand the Lord performed mighty miracles? Is it not the same Moses that destroyed the economy of a mighty nation like Egypt? Is it not the same Moses that has met God many times personally? So when Moses said, show me your way, what exactly is he saying? The way of God, you know, are the commandments of God. They are the instructions of God, they are the teachings of God, and the life of God. It is possible for a man to know the power of God, but not the life of God. So such men will do many miracles, but yet the works of the flesh will still be strong in their life. Have you seen a mighty man of God beating his wife before? Some even fight with others physically and verbally, saying abusive words and all sort of unimaginable things. When you see people like this, they are the typical example of people who only knew the power of God but not his life. The duty of God's power and God's life are not the same. The power of God helps you to do things of God. The power of God helps you to do the things of God, such as miracles, walking in the supernatural, healing, and so on. But the life of God will affect how you act. It will birth in you a new culture. It will affect how to behave and live your life. The life of God is what will help you to always do what Jesus would have done if physically present. Those with the life of God don't act anyhow. The first question they ask themselves is, what will Jesus have done if he is here now? So, this is the question that will guide how they react and respond to things. This is why Moses demanded that he wanted to know God. The knowledge he demanded for here is not to know God's power, but you know, he's not demanding to know God's power because he has that already. But what he wanted to know was the life of God. He wanted to have the life of God to the full. So by saying, show me your way, Moses was indirectly saying, show me your life. Teach me your instructions. I hope you understand. God bless you. This is the wisdom of God. Don't sell it.